Picture this. It's late 1943. The Allies are gearing up for the single biggest, most important military operation in the history of the world, the invasion of Normandy, D-Day. And the one man everyone, and I mean everyone, expects to lead it, America's most famous, most aggressive, and most feared combat general, is about to be told he doesn't have the job. So how does that happen? How does the ultimate warrior get put on the bench for a coordinator, a diplomat? Well, that's the story we're diving into. And that right there is the central puzzle, isn't it? We're talking about General George S. Patton. This guy was a warrior in his very soul. Even the Germans, the enemy, thought he was the best general the Allies had. So why? Why, when the stakes were higher than they have ever been, was he given command of a phantom army? An army that literally didn't even exist, while a quiet staff officer who never led a single man in combat was handed the keys to the entire invasion? It doesn't seem to make sense. So let's set the scene. As 1943 is winding down, this decision is hanging in the air. The fate of the war, the future of the free world, millions of lives, it all comes down to picking the right person to be the supreme Allied commander for what they were calling Operation Overlord. You can just imagine the pressure on President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It was immense. Now, you really need to hear who Roosevelt was saying this to. It wasn't Patton, it wasn't even Eisenhower. He said this to General George C. Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff. At the time, everyone, from Winston Churchill to Joseph Stalin, just assumed Marshall was going to get the command. He was the obvious choice. So this one sentence from the president tells you everything. It shows that the decision wasn't just about who was the best battlefield commander. It was about politics, stability, and the entire global war effort. The stakes were just that high. Okay, to really understand how they landed on a final choice, we've got to look at the three men at the absolute center of this whole drama. Each one of them was a giant, a true legend in his own right. But their skills, their personalities, and the roads they took to get to this moment, they couldn't have been more different. So first, of course, you have George S. Patton, old blood and guts. This guy was born into a wealthy military family, and he was the classic warrior through and through. He wore these custom uniforms, carried twin ivory-handled revolvers, and he honestly believed he was the reincarnation of ancient conquerors. This wasn't a job for him. It was his destiny. He'd commanded tanks back in World War I and was an absolute master of fast, aggressive, mobile warfare. To the public, and more importantly to the enemy, he was American military power. And then, on the complete other end of the spectrum, there's Dwight D. Eisenhower, Ike. He came from a really humble background in Kansas and went to West Point just to get a free education. His entire career wasn't spent on the battlefield. It was spent behind a desk. He was a brilliant staff officer, a planner, an organizer, a diplomat. He could move armies on paper like no one else. But here's the crucial thing. He had never once heard a shot fired in anger or commanded a single soldier in actual combat. And finally, there's the man everyone assumed had the job in the bag, George C. Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff. Winston Churchill himself called him the organizer of Allied victory. And he wasn't exaggerating. Marshall had taken this tiny, poorly equipped U.S. Army back in 1939 and single-handedly transformed it into the most powerful military force the world had ever seen. He was the grand strategist, the political operator. He was the man who saw the entire global chessboard from his office in Washington. And this slide just lays out the difference perfectly. Side by side, look at their careers. Patton's is all action, combat in 2 wars, medals for personal bravery under fire, leading from the front. Eisenhower's is all preparation, graduating first in his class at the prestigious Command and General Staff School, training troops back home, planning massive operations. They were experts in 2 fundamentally different, but as it turns out, equally vital parts of war. Just as this massive decision for the D-Day command was getting close, a crisis erupted that threw Patton's fitness for the top job into serious question. And it wasn't a mistake he made on the battlefield. It was a profound error in judgment that happened far away from the front lines, in the quiet of a field hospital. So what happened was this. In August of 1943, during the campaign in Sicily, Patton was visiting hospitals. He came across 2 soldiers who were suffering from what we would now call PTSD, or combat fatigue. But Patton, he saw them as cowards, shirking their duty, and he just exploded. He slapped both men, screamed at them, and in one case even threatened a soldier with his pistol. Now, the incidents were kept quiet at first, but then in November, a journalist named Drew Pearson got wind of it and broke the story to the American public. It caused an absolute firestorm. But here's the really crucial part of the story. It's how Eisenhower handled it. He was absolutely furious. He wrote Patton this blistering letter.
saying that brutality, abuse of the sick, nor exhibition of uncontrollable temper would be tolerated. He made Patton personally apologize to the soldiers, to the doctors, to everyone involved. In this incident, it revealed a fatal flaw in Patton for a job like Supreme Commander. It showed an impulsiveness, a lack of emotional control that was just way too risky for a leader who would have to manage a very fragile, very political international coalition.
Okay, so with Patton now seen as a huge political liability, and with Marshall being considered absolutely essential to stay in Washington, the logic for the final decision started to snap into focus. The choice wasn't about finding the best warrior anymore. It was about solving a complex equation of skills needed for a very specific and completely unprecedented challenge. And this table really makes that logic crystal clear. If you're talking about pure battlefield tactics, who's better at maneuvering tanks and troops? It's Patton, hands down, no question. But look at the other skills required for D-Day. You needed someone who could manage the massive egos of Allied commanders, like Britain's Montgomery and Francis de Gaulle. You needed someone who could deal with politicians, like Churchill and Roosevelt. You had to coordinate the armies, navies, and air forces of a dozen different nations. And in those areas, diplomacy, politics, logistics, Eisenhower wasn't just better, he was in a completely different league. And that's because you have to understand, D-Day wasn't just a bigger battle. It was a totally different kind of challenge. We're talking about landing over 150,000 men on the very first day, supported by 7,000 ships and 11,000 aircraft. It was a test of organization and cooperation on a scale humanity had literally never seen before. It didn't need a field general as much as it needed a chairman of the board. And so, on December 7th, 1943, 2 years to the day after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt made his final decision. He told Marshall he just couldn't risk having him out of Washington, and then he let Eisenhower know he had the command. By all accounts, Ike himself was completely stunned. He had fully expected Marshall to get the job and was actually preparing to take Marshall's place as the new chief of staff.
But what about Patton? I mean, are you really just going to let America's best combat generals sit on the sidelines for the biggest invasion in history? Not a chance. In one of the great, beautiful ironies of the entire war, Eisenhower found the absolute perfect role for him, a role where Patton's fearsome reputation would become his single most powerful weapon.
It was a plan called Operation Fortitude, a brilliant, intricate deception plan. The Allies created a completely fake army in the southeast of England. We're talking inflatable tanks, wooden airplanes, phony radio chatter, all of it designed to convince Hitler that the main invasion was coming at the Pas de Calais, which is the shortest point across the English Channel. But to make that threat believable, to really sell the lie, they needed a commander so famous, so feared, that the Germans would have no choice but to take it seriously. There was only one man for that job, George Patton. And the Germans, they bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. Why? Because as their own top general in the West, Field Marshal von Rundstedt, admitted after the war, they considered Patton the Allies' best tactical commander. So their logic was simple and fatally flawed. The Allies would, of course, use their best general for their main attack. Therefore, wherever Patton is, that's where the real invasion has to be. The result of this incredible deception was, well, it's staggering. Even after Allied troops hit the beaches at Normandy on June 6th, Hitler refused to release his powerful 15th Army from the Calais region. He was absolutely convinced Normandy was just a trick, a diversion. For 7 critical weeks, 7 weeks, while the Allies were desperately fighting to secure their foothold in France, an entire German army sat and waited for Patton's phantom invasion, an invasion that was never, ever going to come. And this right here, this is the ultimate irony of the whole story. Patton's single most important contribution to the success of D-Day was achieved without him firing a single shot. His reputation, masterfully wielded by Eisenhower as a strategic weapon, did more to ensure the Normandy beachhead was secured than his tanks ever could have on that day. It was a victory of perception, a strategic masterstroke.
So you see, the crucial point to take away is this. The choice was never a slight against Patton's abilities as a fighter. It was a clear-eyed recognition that leadership isn't one size fits all. D-Day didn't need the sharpest sword. It needed the master architect, the one person who could draw the blueprint, assemble all the thousands of pieces, and make absolutely sure the entire structure held together under unimaginable pressure. And in the end, victory required all 3 of these men. each playing the exact part for which they were uniquely suited. You had Marshall, the global architect in Washington, seeing the whole board. You had Eisenhower, the supreme coordinator in Europe, the ultimate project manager, and then you had Patton, the peerless tactical genius, the warrior who was finally unleashed after D-Day to lead the charge across France. It was a perfect complementary system of leadership.
And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? In our own world today, in business, in politics, in any complex organization, we tend to glorify the Pattons, the aggressive, outspoken, frontline performers. But the story of D-Day is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most crucial leader, the one who makes everything else possible, is the quiet Eisenhower working in the background, the one who coordinates, who collaborates, and who keeps the whole enterprise from falling apart. It really makes you wonder, who are we overlooking today?